Step off the local train in rural Shikoku, walk 10 minutes away from the tiny station, and the silence becomes absolute. There are no children playing in the streets. There is no traffic moving through the intersections. There are just houses, wooden frames slowly sinking into overgrown bamboo forests, heavy ceramic roof tiles slipping one by one into the narrow, cracked streets, calendars hanging on kitchen walls, perfectly frozen in the year 2008, teacups still sitting in the sink, covered in a decade of thick dust. In some villages, wild boars and macaques have pushed through rotting sliding doors to claim the living rooms. This is not a ghost town created by a sudden natural disaster, an urgent evacuation order, or a localized economic collapse. It is an entirely manufactured crisis of paper, policy, and demographic gravity. In Japan today, a record 9 million homes sit completely abandoned. That is nearly 14% of the nation's entire housing stock. 1 in every 7 homes across the archipelago is an empty, decaying shell. To understand the sheer scale of this physical footprint, imagine every single residential property in the state of New York sitting empty, rotting from the inside out, while the legal owners actively refuse to claim them. You might naturally assume these crumbling structures belong to the municipal government or the state. They do not. You might assume they have been seized by aggressive banks in a massive wave of rural foreclosures. They are not. They are legally owned by everyday citizens who have run the brutal math and realized a chilling truth. In the world's 4th largest economy, owning a piece of the physical earth has become a severe financial liability. The Akiya, the Japanese term for these vacant houses, is not just a tragic symptom of a shrinking population. It is the direct result of a hidden institutional trap. A deeply entrenched legal mechanism makes it mathematically cheaper to let a neighborhood slowly collapse than to wipe the slate clean.
To understand how 9 million homes become legally untouchable, you have to look closely at the machinery of the Japanese post-war economic miracle. In the 1950s and 1960s, the national imperative was rapid, explosive expansion. Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya were massive industrial engines requiring continuous labor forces. But the countryside was also booming. Government policy heavily incentivized a relentless construction cycle to house a soaring population recovering from devastation. Unlike in Europe or North America, where stone and brick houses were built to accumulate equity and last for centuries, the Japanese housing market adopted a highly specific, high-turnover philosophy. Houses were built exactly like consumer goods. The cultural and economic model of scrap and build meant that a standard wooden home was designed by the market to depreciate to zero financial value over 20 to 30 years. The land beneath the house held the actual wealth. The structure itself was temporary, meant to be torn down and entirely replaced by the next generation of workers. For decades, this high-velocity system worked perfectly. The population was exploding, multi-generational families lived under one roof, passing down the valuable land and rebuilding the timber frames as needed. During the late 1980s, Japanese real estate was so highly valued that the grounds of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo were theoretically worth more than all the real estate in the state of California. This hypervaluation created a deeply entrenched psychological anchor. Families believed rural land would always retain extreme value. But a demographic cliff was approaching, and the rigid national tax code never adjusted to meet the new reality. When the historic Japanese asset bubble finally collapsed in 1991, the psychological shock was matched only by the financial devastation. Land prices plummeted violently, erasing trillions of yen in paper wealth almost overnight. At the exact same time, national birth rates entered a steep, irreversible decline. The young drained out of regional prefectures, migrating to the megacities in search of wage stability and corporate jobs. They left behind aging parents in sprawling rural homes. This massive internal migration fundamentally broke the traditional cycle of inheritance. A massive aging house in rural Akita or a mountain town in Nagano was no longer a prized family estate. It was an anchor. Today, Japan is the world's oldest super-aging society. Deaths outpace births by hundreds of thousands every single year.
The demographic math is brutal, highly visible, and widely documented by global economists. But population decline alone does not automatically create a 9 million home graveyard. If a population shrinks, a normal real estate market responds. Prices drop, land is cleared, nature reclaims the space, or developers consolidate the empty lots into new commercial ventures. Japan's rural land is not being cleared. It is rotting in a state of suspended animation. The physical decay is highly visible, but the invisible decay is entirely structural. A massive blind spot in the municipal tax system created a bizarre paradox where a dangerous, collapsing house is financially superior to a plot of empty dirt.
Meet the modern Japanese inheritor. A 50-year-old mid-level salaryman living in a cramped, expensive Tokyo apartment receives a formal legal notice from a rural municipal office. His last surviving grandparent has died. He is now the sole legal owner of a 60-year-old wooden house in a town he has not visited in 3 decades. He cannot live in it. His corporate job, his children's schools, and his entire life are 400 miles away in the concrete sprawl of the capital. He immediately attempts to sell it. He contacts a local real estate agent, only to be politely turned away. The Japanese real estate market strictly dictates that houses older than 30 years have zero structural value. The only theoretical value is the land itself. In a shrinking rural town facing rapid depopulation and vanishing local industry, buyer demand is virtually non-existent. The property is practically unsellable at any price. He cannot even give it away for free to a neighbor, because legally acquiring real estate in Japan triggers mandatory acquisition taxes and registration fees for the new owner. Nobody wants to pay a government tax penalty to inherit a worthless, collapsing building. The property transforms from an asset into what locals call negative real estate. So, the Tokyo salaryman sits at his kitchen table and calculates his next move. The logical step in a functional, rational market would be to demolish the structure. Tear down the rotting wood, clear the lot, and either sell the bare land for a fraction of the cost or donate it to the city municipality to be used as a public park. But the exact moment he picks up the phone to call a local demolition crew, he hits the impenetrable institutional wall. Demolishing a standard Japanese house costs roughly 1 to 2 million yen. That is 10 to 20,000 US dollars, paid entirely out of pocket for a property that will generate absolutely zero financial return. Yet the upfront cash requirement is not the true trap. The real punishment comes directly from the local tax authority. It is a mathematical penalty so severe that it forces the salaryman to hang up the phone, lock the front door of the empty house, and walk away forever.
The precise mechanism keeping 9 million homes in permanent purgatory is the Japanese property tax law. Decades ago, to desperately encourage residential development and solve post-war housing shortages, the national government implemented a powerful permanent tax incentive. If a plot of land holds a standing residential structure, the annual property tax on that specific land is slashed to 1/6 of its normal rate, a massive 80% discount, deliberately designed to reward citizens for providing housing. This law was drafted for a booming, expanding empire. It never anticipated a rapidly shrinking one. Today, that exact same law functions as a financial hostage situation. If our Tokyo salaryman spends $20,000 to demolish his grandparents' rotting house, the municipal government instantly reclassifies the property as vacant land. The residential tax break vanishes overnight. His annual property tax bill automatically multiplies by up to 6 times. The institutional incentive is mathematically absolute. Do not tear down the house. As long as a structure remains standing on the concrete foundation, no matter how decayed, dangerous, or infested it becomes, the legal owner pays the absolute minimum in taxes. The rational economic decision is total abandonment. Owners continue paying the fractional tax on the standing ruin, or they intentionally obscure their ownership records to dodge the bills entirely. When inheritance taxes loom, families exploit complex legal loopholes to legally renounce the property, severing their ties without transferring the deed to a new buyer. The land enters a dark legal void. The chain of title completely shatters. Local governments are paralyzed by this maneuver. Even when an Akiya poses a severe safety risk, with collapsing roofs, extreme fire hazards, and aggressive vermin infestations, city halls cannot simply send in bulldozers.
Japanese private property rights are exceptionally strong and fiercely protected by law. To legally demolish an abandoned home, the government must track down every single legal heir to request formal written permission. In a country where inheritance records are often decades out of date and property registries are not strictly mandatory to update upon death, a single crumbling house might have 20 scattered heirs. Some of those heirs do not even know they own a fraction of the estate. If even one heir refuses, or simply cannot be found by government investigators, the bulldozers stay parked. The municipal government is forced to watch its neighborhoods decay street by street, totally powerless to intervene. The financial burden on the state is staggering. When a municipality finally manages to seize a truly abandoned property after years of legal battles, the city must pay the demolition costs out of its own shrinking tax revenue. For a small rural town already struggling to fund basic elderly care and road maintenance, spending $20,000 to tear down a single worthless house is a catastrophic misallocation of public funds. And the collapse is highly contagious. One single Akiya destroys the property value of the home next door. The neighbor, unable to tolerate the plummeting value and the physical hazard of the rotting structure, packs up and moves away. A second Akiya is born. A quiet administrative want spreads through the town, perfectly legal and mathematically inevitable.
Only recently have desperate municipalities begun passing localized ordinances, like the Vacant Houses Special Measures Act, to strip the tax break from officially designated dangerous properties. But the severe bureaucratic friction of legally proving a house is dangerous keeps the national numbers climbing. The system remains fundamentally unbroken in its rigid paralysis. A house is traditionally supposed to be a machine for living. In Japan, millions of houses have become monuments to an obsolete economic model. They are the physical scars of a system that knew exactly how to grow, but never learned how to shrink. The Akiya crisis reveals the terrifying friction between demographic reality and institutional momentum. Laws written for a population of 120 million expanding citizens do not peacefully adapt to a population of 100 million aging ones. The legal framework simply breaks, leaving the physical world trapped in the resulting fallout. This is no longer just a localized Japanese mystery. It is a massive early warning signal broadcasting directly to the rest of the industrialized world. South Korea is aging rapidly, facing its own severe rural hollowing and plummeting birth rates that threaten to leave entire provinces empty. Italy has launched desperate €1 home schemes in frantic attempts to fight the exact same architectural decay in its isolated mountain villages. China has overbuilt entire massive cities that currently stand completely empty, waiting for a population boom that demographic data proves will never arrive. The true mechanics of societal decline are quiet. They do not arrive with a sudden